It started with a walk. No sirens, no shouting, no signs of trouble, just Malik Turner, 16, sore from basketball practice, cutting through a neighborhood that wasn't built for kids who looked like him. Silver Pines was quiet, pristine, and perfectly edged, the kind of place where sprinklers whispered before dawn, and strangers weren't just noticed, they were reported. Malik wasn't lost. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. His hoodie wasn't a statement, it was just weather. His gym bag held nothing but sneakers and sweat. But someone behind a bay window saw him and rewrote the story in their head. Black boy, alone, carrying something. Must be up to no good. And just like that, reality bent. One call, 2 cruisers, lights cutting through the calm like blades. "Stop right there." Malik froze. The moment didn't feel real until a hand drifted too close to a holster, and his body remembered every warning his mother ever gave him about staying alive. He thought it would end with questions. It didn't. He thought the truth would be enough. It wasn't. But what no one counted on, what not even the officers knew, was who his mother was. She wasn't just a parent. She was power in heels, a name they should have recognized, and she wasn't coming quietly. By the time the silence returned to Silver Pines, it wouldn't be Malik under the microscope, it would be the system that stopped him. And the woman who made that call? She'd have to ask herself a question more uncomfortable than guilt. What if the real danger was never the boy on the sidewalk? Margaret Whitaker had lived in Silver Pines for 19 quiet years. She knew the rhythms of her street the way a conductor knows a symphony, who watered their lawn at 6:15, who walked the golden retriever with the lopsided gait, whose college-age daughter came home every third weekend in a white SUV. Nothing slipped past Margaret. Not out of nosiness, she told herself, but out of vigilance. It was important to be aware, attentive, cautious. That's why when she spotted a tall figure walking alone on the far side of the street, a hoodie pulled up, a bag slung low on one shoulder, something in her gut clenched. He wasn't running, he wasn't creeping, but she'd never seen him before. And in a neighborhood like this, unfamiliarity had a way of feeling dangerous. She stepped back from the window, heart tapping harder than she liked to admit. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just passing through. But what if he wasn't? Margaret's mind filled the silence with worst-case headlines. Break-in on Wexley Drive, elderly woman assaulted during home invasion. She wasn't being racist, at least. That's what she told herself as her thumb hovered over the phone. She wasn't scared of him. She was scared of what might happen if she ignored her instincts. So she made the call. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone walking down my street. I don't recognize him. Calm questions followed. She gave a description vague but coded. Tall, black, hoodie, bag. Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere, not panicked. When the dispatcher asked if he'd done anything illegal, she hesitated. Well, no, but this is a quiet neighborhood. She hung up, convincing herself she'd done the right thing. Better safe than sorry. That's what everyone says, right? But as she stepped back toward the window, the sight of flashing lights racing down the street sent a strange chill through her chest. The boy hadn't done anything. She'd admitted as much. Still, they came, and she watched as the boy froze under red and blue lights, watched as her quiet street turned into a scene, watched something she couldn't name rise in her throat, shame maybe, or realization. Because whether she meant to or not, Margaret Whitaker had just written the first line of a story that wasn't hers to tell. The sirens sliced through the stillness like glass breaking in a museum. Malik turned instinctively, confusion pulling at his brow as a black and white cruiser sped up the street toward him. Its lights danced across the windows of the perfect homes lining Wexley Drive, casting red and blue flickers onto brick facades and manicured hedges. For a second, he thought they were headed somewhere else, someone else. But the squad car slowed, then stopped. 2 doors opened in unison. Boots hit the pavement. "Hey, stop right there!" Malik froze. His headphones still hung around his neck, music forgotten. His hands lifted halfway in the air, the gym bag slipping slightly off his shoulder. His mouth opened, but the words got stuck behind a wall of adrenaline. He wasn't prepared for this. The taller officer, broad, barrel-chested, with sun-worn skin and a sharp voice, stepped forward. His badge read D. Cruz. "What's in the bag?" he barked. Malik blinked. Just my basketball gear. I'm heading home." Cruz didn't move. His partner, a younger Latina officer named Espinoza, stayed a few steps behind, watching, her hand hovering near her belt. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir," Malik said, trying to keep his voice even. "Just a few blocks that way." Cruz narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "Address?" Malik started to answer, but before he could finish, Cruz snatched the bag from his shoulder. "Hey, that's my stuff." "Relax," Cruz muttered, already unzipping it. A pair of worn sneakers, a sweat-soaked jersey, a water bottle, nothing more. Espinoza shifted, glancing at Cruz. "Dan, maybe we..." "Why'd you cut through this neighborhood?" Cruz cut her off. Malik swallowed hard. "It's just a shortcut. I'm not doing anything wrong." Silence stretched for a moment. Then, as if on cue, Cruz looked past Malik, his eyes hard. "Then why'd someone call the cops?" That question hit like a punch. Malik didn't have an answer, because the truth was both too simple and too complex. Someone saw a black teenager and decided it was a problem. He stood there sweaty, exhausted, alone under flashing lights and judgment, wishing he could disappear, wishing someone, anyone, would show up and say this was all a mistake. And then he heard it. The low growl of tires, the crunch of gravel, a sleek black SUV turning the corner fast, pulling up behind the cruiser. The door opened, and everything changed. Camille Turner didn't speed. She didn't have to. The moment she got the call, she didn't panic, she pivoted. Canceled her afternoon city council meeting mid-sentence, slid her heels back on, and moved with the kind of purpose born from practice. This wasn't the first time she had to protect her son, but it was the first time the world would see her do it in full daylight. As her black SUV curved into Silver Pines, her fingers gripped the wheel tighter than she meant to. She had hoped this moment would never come. But a mother of a black boy doesn't live on hope. She lives on preparation. When she saw the cruiser ahead, lights still flashing, her son standing motionless under its glow, something cold pressed against her ribs. She didn't floor the gas. She didn't blast the horn. She parked with precision and stepped out with the silence of a storm gathering strength. Her navy blazer was sharp, her stride even sharper. Every click of her heels on the pavement felt like punctuation. Officer Cruz turned, brows lifting at the sight of her. Recognition flickered across his face, but he said nothing. "Is there a problem here?" Camille asked, voice smooth, but with edges that could slice through steel. "We received a call about a suspicious individual in the neighborhood," Cruz replied, his tone suddenly clipped, cautious. "That individual," she said, gesturing to Malik without looking away from Cruz, "is my son." Malik exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 100 years. Officer Espinoza shifted beside her partner, visibly uncomfortable. "We were just verifying what?" Camille's eyes locked onto Espinoza now. "That a black boy walking home after practice somehow constitutes a threat?" No answer. Just the hum of the cruiser and the weight of silence settling over the street. Camille pulled out her phone, tapped twice, and held it up. A photo. Malik. School ID. Proof of address. And a picture of the two of them at a youth community event, smiling, alive, human. "Next time you pull someone over," she said, "make sure you're not confusing your bias for suspicion." The officers didn't move, didn't speak. Behind a curtain across the street, Margaret Whitaker watched, breath caught in her throat. The woman she'd unknowingly called the cops on? She wasn't just a mother. She was Camille Turner, candidate for mayor, and she had just arrived. For a long moment, no one moved. Camille Turner stood like a statue carved from authority, her phone still raised, her expression unreadable. The screen lit and steady glowed with proof. Her son's student ID, their home address in Easton Heights, and a smiling photo from a voter registration drive where she'd been shaking hands with the same police chief these officers reported to. Recognition finally reached Officer Cruz's eyes, slow and begrudging. He didn't say her name out loud, but the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his jaw clicked, he knew exactly who she was now. Espinoza glanced between them, uncertainty splashed across her face. "You're Camille Turner," she said, more breath than voice. "You're on the city council." "Not for long," Camille replied flatly, slipping her phone back into her blazer. "I'm polling ahead in the mayoral race, but today, I'm just a mother whose son was stopped for walking while black." The words landed like stones. The silence grew heavier. Cruz cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. "We were responding to a call from a resident. She said he looked suspicious." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious how?" "She said he was looking around, carrying a bag. She didn't recognize him." "A teenager, with a gym bag, coming home from school," Camille said slowly, her voice sharp as glass. And that was enough for you to search him without consent? Cruz's mouth opened, then closed. Espinosa shifted her weight but stayed silent. Camille took a step forward, not loud, not angry, just closer. You didn't see a student, you saw a profile, and you filled in the rest. Behind them, Malik stood still, tired, humiliated, and aware that even with his mother there, he still felt small beneath the weight of flashing lights. Across the street, Margaret Whitaker stood frozen in her doorway, her hands trembling at her sides. She saw it all now, the mistake, the assumption, the consequence. Camille's eyes moved to her, holding not accusing but piercing. And in that moment, Margaret wished the blinds had stayed shut. But they hadn't. And the truth, once seen, could no longer be unspoken. The silence that followed felt longer than it was. Camille didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The truth had already landed loud, undeniable, and suffocating. And while Officer Cruz stood stone-faced, unwilling to show even a crack in his armor, Espinosa's expression had shifted entirely. What started as guarded professionalism had softened into something closer to regret. Malik still hadn't moved. His gym bag hung limply from one hand, his shoulders slumped. Not from fatigue, though he was tired, but from something heavier, something less visible. The kind of weight you carry when you've done everything right and still end up under flashing lights. Having to prove your existence is not a threat. Camille turned to him, her voice quieter now. You okay? He nodded, once. But his eyes didn't meet hers. They were focused somewhere else, nowhere, really. Somewhere between shame and numbness. Across the street, Margaret Whitaker remained by her window, arms folded tightly over her chest. She watched as Camille led Malik toward the SUV, watched the boys' slow steps, watched the officers shift awkwardly near their cruiser. And for the first time, Margaret felt something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not of Malik, of herself. She had called the police because of a feeling, a gut instinct, she told the dispatcher. But now, standing in her quiet home, she replayed that moment in her mind, and it sounded different. Colder, smaller. I don't recognize him. He doesn't look right. But what exactly had looked wrong? Margaret backed away from the window, heart fluttering. She told herself she wasn't like those people. She didn't harbor hate. But she couldn't deny that she'd seen a boy and immediately imagined a threat. And now that threat had a name, a mother, a life, a story that didn't end in handcuffs but so easily could have. At the curb, Officer Cruz gave a stiff nod, muttered, "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way." Camille didn't reply. She simply opened the passenger door for her son. Espinosa hesitated, then offered a quiet, "I'm sorry." Camille met her gaze. "Are you sorry it happened or sorry you saw it?" Espinosa didn't answer. And as the SUV pulled away, as the cruiser slowly followed, Margaret stood in the stillness of her perfect street, left with nothing but her reflection in the glass and a question she wasn't sure how to answer. The SUV was silent as it rolled down Monroe Avenue, past the storefronts Malik had seen 100 times, past the coffee shop Camille always stopped at on Friday mornings, past the mural of civil rights leaders on the corner of 8th and Main. But today, the familiar felt hollow. Nothing looked the same after blue lights reflected in your eyes. Camille gripped the wheel tighter than usual, her knuckles pale, her jaw still set. She hadn't spoken since they left Silver Pines, and neither had Malik. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like the air after thunder. Finally, as they turned onto their street, Malik spoke barely above a whisper. "Would it have ended the same way if you hadn't shown up?" Camille didn't answer right away. She pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know," she said softly. "But I didn't want to find out." Malik looked out the window. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know. I answered everything right. I stood still. I didn't argue. I let them search my stuff." "You did everything you were supposed to." She turned to face him. "And still," Malik let out a hollow laugh, "still, I was just a problem someone needed to fix." Camille reached over, placed a hand gently over his. "You are not a problem. You are my son. You are brilliant and kind, and worth protecting every damn day." He nodded slowly, but the weight didn't lift. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shaking. But something inside him had shifted, a quiet, bitter awareness that the world saw his height before his humanity, his skin before his soul. "I don't want to be scared every time I walk home," he whispered. "I don't want you to be either," Camille replied. But we don't get to choose how the world sees us. We only get to choose how we answer it. Malik looked at her, then really looked at her. The woman who had stood toe-to-toe with police, who had walked into a minefield with grace and steel. He wondered how many times she'd had to do it quietly, when no one was watching. And in that still moment, the walls of their home held something heavier than rage or sadness. They held truth. Margaret Whitaker didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the phone that still rested on her nightstand, the same one she had used to call 911, the same one that now felt heavier than it should. Her husband had asked what was wrong. She told him she just felt off. She didn't tell him everything. Not yet. Earlier that evening, after the SUV and police cruiser had gone, she had watched the street return to its unnerving normalcy. Sprinklers clicked on. A dog barked 2 doors down. And yet nothing felt normal anymore. She had seen the boy's face, not angry, not defiant, just tired. And his mother, Camille Turner, had looked directly at her with eyes that weren't accusatory, but unflinching. Margaret had expected outrage, but what she got was worse. Quiet clarity. She opened her notes app and started typing. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put your son in danger, I was wrong." Then she deleted it, started again. "I didn't think it would go that far. I didn't know who you were." Delete. She couldn't find the words. Every draft sounded like an excuse, and that, more than anything, made her sick. Across town, Officer Maria Espinoza sat alone in her parked cruiser, the night shift lights dimmed, a half-written report glowing on the laptop in front of her. She kept replaying Camille Turner's voice in her head. "Are you sorry it happened or sorry you saw it?" She hadn't answered then, and she didn't have an answer now. Dan Cruz had moved on like it was just another call. "We followed protocol," he had said. She turned it into something political. But Espinoza knew better. Protocol wasn't supposed to feel like this. Her training hadn't prepared her for the silence that came after realizing you'd been complicit in something deeply wrong without ever raising your voice or drawing your weapon. She had thought about calling Camille, even drafted a message, but she didn't send it. Because apologies, once delayed long enough, start to sound hollow even to the one who speaks them. And so, nothing was said, nothing was done. But for Malik Turner, the silence still echoed. And for Margaret Whitaker, the guilt sat like dust on every windowsill, quiet, constant, and impossible to clean away. By Monday morning, the story had already begun to spread. It started small, a social media post from a bystander who'd caught part of the stop on video. Just 30 seconds long, shaky footage of Malik standing beneath flashing lights while 2 officers rifled through his bag. No shouting, no violence. But that wasn't the point. The caption read simply, "This is what a shortcut home looks like when you're black." By lunchtime, the post had been shared over 5,000 times. Local news outlets picked it up. Talk radio buzzed. And suddenly, Camille Turner's name wasn't just on campaign posters, it was on every screen in Columbus. Reporters began calling her office, asking for statements. School board members sent private messages of support. Activists asked if she'd speak at a community town hall. Some warned her to stay quiet, to let the story fade. But Camille knew better. This story wasn't fading, it was catching fire. Her staff gathered in the campaign office, nervous energy bouncing between them like static. "We need to get ahead of this," her communications director said. "Control the narrative before someone else does." Camille stared at the video on her phone again. Malik's stillness, the restraint in his eyes, the way he didn't flinch, even when they treated him like a suspect. He had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. She thought of Margaret Whitaker, of the silence in that window. She thought of Officer Espinoza's almost apology, and she thought of every mother who wouldn't have shown up in time. "I'm not going to control the narrative," Camille said quietly. "I'm going to tell the truth." That night, at a packed school auditorium, she stood at the podium not as a candidate, but as a mother, as a black woman, as someone who was tired of being grateful when situations like these didn't end in blood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We teach our children to follow the rules, to be respectful, to stay calm. But none of that stops a stranger's fear from dialing 911. The room fell silent. "This isn't just about my son. This is about every time someone like him is seen as a threat before they're seen as a child." Outside, someone pressed a sign to the glass. "We believe Malik." Inside, Camille kept speaking. Because the truth wasn't just hers to carry anymore. The applause had long faded. The auditorium had emptied. The signs were folded, the cameras packed away. But the words Camille Turner spoke that night still lingered in the air like the scent of rain after a storm, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. At home, Malik sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. His face was on dozens of screens, shared stories, tweets, think pieces. Teens stopped by police for walking while black, one headline read. Another, candidate for mayor confronts racial bias in her own backyard. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He didn't want to be. He just wanted to go back to the part of life where walking home didn't feel like a political act. Camille stood in his doorway, watching him with that same steady gaze she had worn on Wexley Drive, strong, unflinching. But now there was something else behind it, something softer, a quiet grief only a mother could carry. "You okay?" she asked. Malik nodded but didn't look up. "It's weird. People keep messaging me, like I'm some kind of symbol." "You are," she said gently, "but you're also still you." He finally looked at her. "Will it ever get better?" Camille didn't answer right away. She crossed the room, sat beside him, and took a breath. "I don't know, but I know we don't get better by staying silent." They sat together in that moment, neither speaking, both understanding. Across town, Margaret Whitaker stood at her window again, the same place she'd stood when she made the call, but this time her hands weren't folded. They were clasped, still, thoughtful. She hadn't called again. She hadn't apologized either. But for the first time, she had started to question the fear she'd always trusted. Maybe that was something. Because sometimes the danger isn't who's walking down your street. Sometimes it's the person staring out from behind the glass. And for every Malik who makes it home, there are too many who don't. The warning has changed. It's no longer just, be careful out there. Now it's, be seen, be heard, be known. Because the next time someone reaches for the phone, the story might end differently. Or it might not end at all. There comes a point in life when we must ask not just what we believe, but how those beliefs shape the way we see others. Lines Crossed reminds us that harm doesn't always come with violence. It can come with a glance, a judgment, or a phone call made in fear. For older generations, this story is a quiet call to reflection. Have we, even unintentionally, been part of the silence that allows injustice to continue? We are taught to be cautious, to protect what we love, but real wisdom lies in knowing the difference between caution and prejudice. This story teaches us that our neighborhoods are safer not when they are guarded by suspicion, but when they are held together by understanding. It's never too late to unlearn fear, to listen more deeply, and to ask the hard questions. What if the danger we saw was never real? And what if in our silence we became the danger ourselves? Let this be a reminder that dignity belongs to everyone, and that the measure of a community isn't how well it protects itself, but how justly it treats those it doesn't yet know. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.